What is going on, everyone? Mets Talk with Hayden here, and welcome back to episode number 12 of the Stressing Mets podcast, postseason edition. And unfortunately, with that said, the Mets postseason, as well as the Mets 2024 season and their World Series champion ambition is officially over. It is put to rest as the Los Angeles Dodgers defeated the New York Mets in the National League Championship Series by a final series score of 4-2. So the New York Mets 2024 season is officially in the books. And, this is really, I guess you could say it's a bittersweet type of podcast. It depends on, what part of the season, you really would have thought this podcast would be taking place in. Like I said, getting into the Mets NLCS with the Los Angeles Dodgers, simply enough, the Mets just did not get the job done. You saw how it was last podcast and the podcast before that when the Mets were in the postseason. And you look at it, you saw how the Mets played in the National League Wild Card Series against the Brewers, the National League Divisional Series against division rival Philadelphia Phillies, and you saw how the Mets played in those two series, and then you compare that to the NLCS against the Dodgers, and simply enough, it looked like a completely different team. Completely opposite of what we saw in the wild card and the NLDS. Whether it was your starters, whether it was your bullpen guys, whether it was, your table setters, your power hitters, the guys lower in the order, whether it was a defensive mishap. The team just simply enough did not look how they were supposed to. You saw the first game in the NLCS, the Mets got destroyed 9-0. Jack Flaherty was wheeling and dealing against the Mets lineup. They could not get a hit off of him, a lot of whiffs, a lot of swinging and misses. You go into game 2, they win that. You go to game 3 and 4 in New York, they lose both of those. Elimination game in game 5, they win that. And then, going back to LA, and they have the mentality of, hey, you got to win the next 2 or else it's over. And unfortunately, that was the case as the Mets were not able to win that game 6 in Los Angeles. And the Dodgers will be going to the World Series to face another New York team in the New York Yankees. But overall, this NLCS, everyone kind of knows what happens, but essentially just to briefly summarize it, the Mets just didn't show up. Their pitching staff didn't get the job done. This was an overtaxed bullpen, an overtaxed rotation where, this rotation essentially of guys like Mania, guys like Peterson, guys like Quintana, guys like Severino, McGill, they were on a short leash of luck. And, how you really have to look at it is it came to question is how long was this rotation going to last? Because you saw immediately on June 1st, they really put their foot on the gas pedal. And essentially in the NLCS, they took it off and were not able to get back on. And that's really, essentially what happened. The starting rotation just could not do their job. They were going out there, not getting the third strike, not getting the third out when needed. The walks were brutal. You look at the first 3 games, 23 innings pitched by starters, including a couple bulk guys, and 30 walks. That's unacceptable. When you're walking that many guys, it's going to come back to bite you. They pitched around Ohtani, they pitched around Betts, they pitched around Freeman, and it was the Dodgers supporting cast, like your Tommy Edmonds, like your Teoscar Hernandez's, whoever it was, that came down and, really went to show the Mets, okay, you're going to walk our guys, we'll take that personal, and they did. Starting rotation, simply enough, just, only going 3, 4, 5 innings. That's unacceptable. You need more because, that really burdens your bullpen. And, that's essentially what we saw. Couldn't get guys out, couple defensive mishaps. Offensively, they really struggled. Couldn't take a single walk. I don't know if walks are evil, but they get into a 3-1, 3-0 count and somehow strike out or not get on base. The offense, they couldn't hit with runners in scoring position. They couldn't even get, fundamental productive outs, whether it was sac flies, moving a runner over. The Mets really just failed to execute. And to be completely honest with you, really, the only player that really showed up in this NLCS was Mark Vientos. I hate to say it, guys like Nimmo didn't really show up. Lindor was so-so. Alonso was so-so. The supporting cast, was so-so. But really, the only offensive guy that really went out there and played his, behind off in the NLCS was Mark Vientos. So, unfortunate. The Mets season is officially over. The farthest they get is to Game 6 of the NLCS. And like I said, it's a bittersweet stream. I think you have to look at it where if you asked me this April, that the Mets would get to Game 6 of the NLCS, I would take that in a heartbeat. I don't think that was on a single Mets fan's bingo card this offseason or early this spring. I mean, you look at it, this team arguably had one of the biggest and best turnarounds in Mets history, baseball history, and arguably sports history. This was a team that started off 0-5, 11 games under 500 mid-May. I mean, this team was at rock bottom, couldn't get any worse. No one was going to the games. You had clubhouse animosity. They looked morally defeated. They looked pathetic. They looked like a joke. I mean, you had the Jorge Lopez, effing worst team, effing worst teammate. And, whether you want to say it was grimace, whether you want to say it was the team meeting that was called, and arguably that was probably it. A lot of these players realize they're a good team and they're only losing to themselves. And everyone, just simply enough, got everyone behind them. They got united and they realized, we're a good ball club. On paper, we're capable of it. And it was, clubhouse leaders like JD Martinez, like Francisco Lindor, like Brandon Nimmo. Those guys are arguably a big reason why the Mets went out there and had the best second half than anyone else in baseball. Francisco Lindor really put a lot of work on his bat and on his back. And a lot of players followed up on that. And then it just became what the Mets were expected to do. You look at 89 wins in a year that was considered a quote-unquote down year, retooling year, weren't projected to be competitive. And you could really only imagine what the Mets could look like when they are actually having projections and being competitive. And I said it in the beginning of this offseason, the best thing for the Mets is for them not to have projections and high expectations, because whenever the Mets have high expectations, they don't do well. We saw it in 2022. We saw it in 2023. We didn't see it this year, and look what happened. They had one of their best second half seasons and arguably a great season with a lot of memories that you have to look at. I mean, I will say this was probably one of the most exciting New York Mets teams I've ever watched play. I'm 22 years old. I was born January 2002. This is arguably one of my favorite teams that I've ever seen play. Whether it was Grimace, whether it was Hokto, whether it was the Rally Dog, whether it was, the Seymour Wiener guy. There were a lot of fun memes, a lot of fun memories, Grimace, all that stuff. And it made going to the ballpark, it made watching this team really exciting. They got guys in the middle of the season that helped out a lot. Unfortunately, couldn't come up to the entirety in the postseason. But overall, you have to look at it. This team overcame a lot of adversity. They overcame a lot of issues and complexity. A morale killer. And, overall, this team really just came back and fought, essentially, is really the best way you could say it. They came back and fought. And, I think any Met fan is, deep down you're upset. You wanted the Mets to go to the World Series. You wanted the Mets to win the World Series. But I think the fact is that you had a turnaround the way they did, and you really have to be proud of this team. You really, really have to be proud of this New York Metropolitans team, and, I am. I think it's an interesting year to see a lot of players. I mean, Francisco Lindor, one of the best seasons of his career. If it wasn't for Ohtani, he would be the NL MVP unanimously, hands down. You saw guys like Mark Vientos really break out. It's going to be interesting to see how a lot of this Mets team goes, next year. It makes the offseason exciting because, there's really a lot for this New York Mets team to come. So, like I said, overall, it was a great season. There were a lot of great memories. There was the good, there was the bad, and there was the ugly. And, unfortunately, the first 2 weeks of October was great. You really saw a lot of players who were not having good seasons, and they showed up big in the wild card in NLDS, especially Pete Alonso. He was a dude who, I would say myself and along with most other Mets fans were ready to write him off and say, bye-bye, have fun in free agency, good luck where you go. And, you look at that Game 3 home run in Milwaukee to make him advance. You look at really all he did in the NLDS and early on in the NLCS. And, like I said, it doesn't matter what you do in the regular season. If you have a bad regular season and a good postseason, Mets fans are only going to remember that postseason. And then, unfortunately, on the contrary, it can go with that. If you have a good regular season and a bad postseason, Mets fans are only going to remember the bad postseason. And that was the case for guys like Francisco Alvarez. That was the case for some guys like Tyrone Taylor, Harrison Bader, some of the other supporting cast, Brandon Nimmo. But, at the end of the day, the Mets went out there and they fought. They fought to the 27th out. They rallied, but they just were not able to get the job done. You could sit here and say the Dodgers are the better team. Maybe they are. Maybe they aren't. But if the Mets played the way they did in that wild card and NLDS series against the Dodgers, I arguably think the Mets could have won or could have even went to a Game 7, a very competitive game. So, overall, the 2024 season is in the books. There was, like I said, a lot of good, a lot of bad, and, some ugly. But the Mets really overcame a lot, and, it goes to show Mets fans, year one of Carlos Mendoza's management, David Stearns as president of operations and running this front office, I think it's safe to say that, the New York Mets are in very good hands. Carlos Mendoza will 89-win season, goes to the NLCS in his rookie year. That's not very common for MLB managers, yet alone any Mets manager that we've seen in quite some time. So it really goes to show you, could Carlos Mendoza, really be a top manager of all time? And honestly, he's a guy who really made me eat my own words early on this season. I was not big on him. I was not great on having a rookie manager. A lot of people said, they should have kept Buck Showalter if this was going to be the case. And, really, Carlos Mendoza and a lot of the Mets coaching staff really shut me up, along with a lot of other Mets fans, essentially. So it really goes to show you the manager had a big play in everything. Mendoza really managed the season very well. He's responsible for a lot of wins, a lot of particular plays, unorthodox plays. We saw it a lot this regular season. Postseason, a little iffy, questionable with some of his bullpen decisions or when to take out a guy or, situational hitting moments, whether it was, batting guys like McNeil over Winker when you have bases loaded. It kind of comes to the thought of, who's more likely to drive in more runs? Who's the better power guy? One swing of the bat could change it up. Little things like that. But at the end of the day, he's not the sole reason the Mets lost. It's on the players. The players have to show up, and if you don't, well, then they're responsible. Then you lose. So, unfortunate NLCS. Like I said, it was a bittersweet postseason, bittersweet podcast, and most importantly, a bittersweet season with how you look back on it. This is probably a season that a lot of Mets fans will talk about in years to come now. So, we'll just have to wait and see and, see what the Mets have in store. It's a big off season. Curious to see how David Stearns and Steve Cohen go on and approach this off season. They're going to want to, spend money, but spend money responsibly on valuable assets and guys that are going to help out this team, not just because, they have the flashy numbers or, the flashy mentality. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But otherwise, that is the end of this video. The 2024 season Stressing Mets podcast is in the books. Now comes the off-season edition, so plenty of more to come. But yeah, otherwise, I appreciate everyone for tuning in. Give this video a like, a comment, subscribe. Please turn on those post notifications and, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What are your thoughts on this regular season? What are your thoughts on this postseason, the wild card, the divisional round, and, unfortunately, the unfortunate elimination in the National League Championship Series? What are your expectations for this offseason? What are your expectations for 2025? Do we think that this is a Mets team that is really going to go above and beyond in the offseason and next season? Do we have trust in David Stearns? Do we have trust in this front office? I'd be very interested to hear. So once again, like, comment, subscribe, post notifications, all that great stuff. It was a phenomenal season. It was a great year. As always, till next time, LFGM.